Hi everyone, welcome back to another solo Q&A episode of the Real Stuff podcast. This one is all about pregnancy, specifically this second pregnancy and how it's going. I'm now in the midst of my second trimester. And for people who don't know where I'm sourcing these questions from, every so often I post a question box on my Instagram story. Sometimes it's on my account, sometimes it's on the Real Stuff Pods account. So make sure you're following both and check the stories every so often. If you ever see a question box like this, most of the time I'm about to make a podcast, and I promise to call you guys out by name when I read the questions. So I went through all your questions, and you had a lot, but before I start, just a little recap about something that happened at my 20-week anatomy scan, because that was really the impetus for me creating this box in the first place, was after I shared the follow-up. For people who don't know, when you are pregnant around 20 weeks, you go in, usually to the hospital, not your OB's office, and you get what's called an anatomy scan. I've heard that this scan is synonymous with being called an anomaly scan because oftentimes you're looking for anomalies, abnormalities, anything that doesn't look right. It can be a very anxiety-inducing scan for new parents, for sure, because you're literally looking at every finger and toe, every organ. The ultrasound tech is saying, these are the kidneys, this is the heart, this is the stomach, this is the brain, these are the two sides of the brain. You can see everything on there. It's wild. In my first pregnancy, I remember the weeks leading up to this scan, just having kind of a pit in my stomach, thinking through all the negative things, Googling like a madwoman, every question that came to mind. And I walked into the scan stressed out. I had the scan done, and the ultrasound tech can't tell you anything as they're doing it. So as soon as they're done, they send the doctor in, and then the doctor comes in and gives you the results. Last time, when I was so stressed and my nerves were up here, the doctor came back in and said, everything looks normal, baby's healthy, you're good. And I left, and that was great. So I think partially because of that, and partially because I'm now in my second pregnancy and everything just feels less heightened, I went into this anatomy scan in a completely different headspace. When I tell you that I didn't even remember that I had my scan on the calendar until the day before, I'm not lying. I wasn't thinking about it. Honestly, this whole pregnancy, I haven't even thought too much about when my appointments are. Like, my family keeps asking me, when's the next time you're going back to the doctor? And I'm like, I don't know. I need to call them and make an appointment. But this 20-week scan was planned weeks ago, and it was on my calendar, and it kind of just crept up on me. And I had absolutely no fears, no second thoughts, and no worries going into it. I pull up to the scan. Michael's with me, but he has to leave a little early. So he's with me while the ultrasound tech is doing the scan. And then, they're not allowed to tell you anything, but this woman was acting like everything was pretty normal. And then Michael had to go leave to get back to work. So he left, and I said, I'll just tell you what the doctor says. Of course, 100% she's going to say it's fine. That was what I was thinking. The doctor comes back in, and she basically starts with the words that you don't want to hear and says, so we found something, but, and just starts immediately jumping on it and giving 100 caveats about how what we found is not a big deal. In most cases, it's often a benign incidental finding, and most of the time people don't have to worry about it, but basically every umbilical cord has a vein that runs in to the baby through the umbilical cord, and then two arteries that run out of the umbilical cord. Your umbilical cord has the vein running in and then only one artery running out. So it's called single umbilical artery. A lot of times online it will be called SUA. It is a rare finding that is actually happening more and more in people, but it's really not a problem unless we also see that there are heart and or kidney issues associated with it. And in your case, the heart and kidney looked good today. But just to be extra cautious, we're going to send you back here next week to do a fetal echocardiogram to get a better look at the heart, just to make sure everything's okay with the heart. Honestly, the way the doctor presented it to me did not make me feel stressed at all. I did not leave there in distress. I called Michael very calmly and reported the findings. I called our families after and told them the findings. It seems like everyone around me was a little more stressed about it than I was. I think it's because I was there when she told me the result. And honestly, one of the things she said, which might be helpful for some other people out there, she said at the hospital she used to work at, which was in New York City, that when they do this exact test that they just did, the anatomy scan, if they see on that scan that the heart and kidneys look good and they find this single umbilical artery, they don't actually do anything about it. They don't send you for a fetal echo. You just maybe get monitored a little bit more closely in your third trimester to make sure the baby is growing appropriately, because I think one small thing that can happen from this is that the baby doesn't grow as big towards the end. But she basically was like, at the old hospital I worked at, we wouldn't do anything. But at this hospital, just we always, out of an abundance of caution, send you for one extra scan. So she made me feel really at ease, and I really left there calmly. But I think just calling the people in my life and telling them that there was any finding on the scan was alarming to a lot of people. And then, of course, when I posted it, I was absolutely blown away. I posted about this before I went for the fetal echo, so before I had confirmation that everything was fine, just in effort to be an open book. And I was floored, jaw on the floor. Is that where that word comes from? I was floored by how many people out there commented that they also had single umbilical artery. And let me tell you why I was floored, because think about this. If this is really as rare of a thing as people say it is, think about the small population in the world that follows me. Okay, so we're already narrowing it down to this tiny population that follows me. Of all the people that follow me, let's narrow it down to just the people who have had pregnancies in their life. Okay, now let's narrow it down even further to just the people that have had pregnancies that follow me that happen to see that one post I made, because the truth is not everyone is served every post. So now we have a really small subset of people. Now the people who happen to see the post I made who also had single umbilical artery. Okay, so now we're in a very tiny group of people. And now think of the people of that category who saw my post, had this thing themselves, and decided to comment on my post. Because I have to believe there were even more people who had this same thing and just don't comment things publicly on posts. So now we have this very small subset of people, and still there were so many of you who commented that you had this too. It truthfully made me question how rare this thing could be if so many of you left a comment saying you had the same thing. And I also got DMs and emails, and thank you so much to everyone who commented. The majority of you had very positive outcomes with your stories, and that was very reassuring to me. Although, to be honest, I was not struggling or stressed when I posted that. I was very at ease with what the doctors had told me, and I was confident that going in for the scan that week, everything was going to be fine. And it was. So after I went back for the following scan, we did the fetal echo, found out everything was fine with my baby girl's heart, thankfully, and I posted a little update on my stories saying everything's good. Now drop your questions for a second pregnancy Q&A. So just wanted to queue up this Q&A with that context and that little story in case it comes into any of the answers. So let's start here with the question from SushiBubble1103. Love that handle. Do you have any names picked out or names that you love but won't be using that you can share? Yes, we have our name. I'm pretty sure we shared this in our my last Q&A. We've picked out a name. It was pretty easy for us to pick out. My husband and I used this app at one point called Baby Names. If you go on the App Store, I think it's like a yellow app that has a little egg on it. And it's basically a dating app for baby names. So you and your partner sync up your accounts, and then on your own time, you are served a handful of names, and you either swipe right or swipe left on them, and then it will tell you if you and your partner have a match. That's how we found and decided on Milo's name. And I think we just had a running list from our last pregnancy, if it were to have been a girl, with names that we liked. I think I've shared before that our top name last time, and the name that Milo was going to be named if he was a girl, was Charlotte. And that's a girl's name that I absolutely love. I think it's beautiful. But Michael and I have decided that we are not going with it for this pregnancy for a couple of reasons. One is just that we don't think it's the right name to pair with Milo. We feel like it's a little bit too proper and regal of a name alongside a name as casual as Milo. So we do want a name that at least the nickname feels a little bit more casual. And also, I don't know, I just feel like we really thought Milo was a girl. So we were calling this baby Poppy. From the moment I found out that I was pregnant with something the size of a poppy seed, we started calling it Poppy, and then we decided on the name Charlotte Poppy if it had been a girl, which we really thought it was. And now that it's not a girl, Charlotte Poppy feels like it was a name designated for our first potential pregnancy, which wound up being a boy. So we're just going in a new direction. We have a new name. And I think one other name for a girl that I'll share that I personally love, and I know it's very rare and a little out there, but I just think it's so cute, is Clementine. I don't know if you guys are going to think that's absurd being a fruit, but I find it to be the sweetest, cutest name ever. And it's just too far out of the bounds of being a normal human name for Michael to have even considered it. So I can tell you we're not going with Charlotte, we're not going with Poppy, and we're not going with Clementine, but all names I love. All right, our next question comes from McKinley.Tretler, and it says, are there things you hope to do differently this time around in the early stages? Yes, I think that this second postpartum period is going to look a little bit different from our family. First and foremost, if not only because we now live in a house and we're in the suburbs instead of the city, we just have a lot more space to play with. And on top of it, it's our second child. So we've been through everything before. It's a little bit less of a whole life change, and it's just a little bit more of an addition to the family. But I do know our postpartum period is going to look different. One reason is that Michael's paternity leave looks different this time. The first time around, Michael had 12 weeks of paternity leave, which is kind of unheard of for men in the US, but still not a lot for what would be ideal. And this time around, he's at a different company and he only gets 6 weeks of leave. And we've talked about him potentially splitting up the leave, so doing 3 weeks up front and then maybe 3 weeks a little bit later down the line once we're in the sleep training phase. I think it would be helpful when we're going through those weeks of sleep training where we're going to need to be regimented overnight and a little more functioning at night, that we will plan on having him be off work during that time to help with that. I saw there was a question about if we plan to use our nurse again, so I'll wait until that question pops up to answer it. But I have been thinking a lot about the concept of nursing, and I did spend a really long time thinking through, what do I want my nursing journey to look like? How is it going to be different from the first time around? Trying to plan and plot. And then I came to the realization that you can't really plan for these things. There's no way for me to know how well this baby is going to latch, how good my supply is going to be this time around, how it's going to feel physically, emotionally. So I'm trying to let go of the need to make a plan for that right now. Although I did see there was a question down below about nursing stuff. So when we get there, I will elaborate a little bit more. And then I think one other way that this postpartum period is probably going to be different for us is Michael and I were pretty intense about not accepting help from either set of our parents too soon, because, we had set these firm boundaries in place that we want to take care of this baby. We don't want our parents to overstep the boundaries. We will tell them when we need help. We don't want them to offer advice or opinions or to try to take the baby and tell us what to do. And so we were pretty firm on that, and our parents were so respectful of the boundary, so much so that we didn't actually leave Milo with grandparents alone, without us present for months and months. And I think this time around, we're just so much more accepting of help. We've kind of gotten past that boundary stage, and we're now at a stage where everyone is incredibly respectful of basic boundaries, but we love passing Milo off to family. We love getting help. We've realized how much of a win-win it is at this point. So I think with this second baby, we plan on letting others step in a little bit sooner, probably letting her have a night out and sleep over and letting us go out to dinner and do some more things by ourselves earlier on than we did with Milo. And I think that just comes from it being the second baby and you realizing that they're going to be okay and you're going to be okay. Next question from Guinea Flower is, what's different between your second pregnancy and your first? There have been a decent number of differences. So the first difference is that the nausea and the general unwellness of the first trimester definitely lingered a bit longer this time around. With Milo, I remember that all kind of stopped cold turkey at 14, 15 weeks. This time, it was closer to maybe 18 or 19 weeks when it was really phasing out. I'm currently at 21 weeks and I have not thrown up in over a month by now, but I will say I still, between meals, feel a slight sense of nausea and just kind of a weird taste in my mouth, a little unwellness at times. And that's definitely one way that this one has been different. Another way that it's been different is that I'm thinking about it a lot less all the time. It's less all-consuming for my brain. Obviously not my body. My body is very much consumed, but it's less thinking about it, less talking about it with people. The whole idea of being pregnant this time around, it's not as novel or exciting as it was the first time. It's more like a means to an end this time. Whereas the first time I really felt like it was this journey of being present at every step and feeling everything and being super involved and engaged with what was going on. And now it's like I'm very well aware that I'm just going through this period until the baby comes out. And I feel more of a sense of I'm ready for this to just be over because I don't love this phase. But all that being said, I'm less anxious than I was the first time. I have memories the first time of pretty much every single morning in my first pregnancy waking up and having a question or a thought and opening my phone and going to Google right away and searching for stuff. Is this feeling normal? Can I do this? A lot of questions and a lot of just general buzz going on up here in my head. This time around, I don't have that. I really don't think I've Googled any questions. I feel such a sense of trust for my doctors and for my body. My body knows what to do. I've done this before. I don't have a lot of questions. I'm not as nervous about every little thing I put on or in my body. I just feel like it's all going to be okay, which is a good place to be. Another difference is that I'm definitely, because of that lower anxiety, eating foods that I was maybe afraid to go near last time. So I'm definitely eating some deli meat style things. I don't like deli turkey, but I've had prosciutto, I've had some salami. We went out to sushi and I didn't get the raw fish, but Michael got it and I had a little piece of it. And things I probably wouldn't have done the first time, being so stressed about what could possibly happen. This time I just feel like my body's got it and I'm good and I'm making informed decisions. You know, I've read the books about the things you can and can't eat, and I feel good about those choices. Less taking over my whole life. Next question is from Becca Christian, and it says, does Milo know what is going on? Is he excited? Maybe I'm giving my 2.5-year-old too much credit, but I think this kid knows what's up. From the moment we told him that I was pregnant and that there was a baby in my tummy and that he was going to be a big brother and have a baby sister, he has been yapping about it, telling other people about it. He told his own teachers about it before we told them. And you just got to believe that he knows what he's saying. He's not at the stage of life where he's just yabbing gibberish. We have real conversations, and I feel like almost everything I say to him, he gets what I'm saying. Obviously not worldly concepts, but he understands what is happening when I tell him that something's happening. So he knows there's a baby in mommy's tummy. He knows, and he says, first it's going to be spring, then it's going to be summer, then it's going to be fall, and that's when baby sister's coming. Or she might come at the end of summer, as mommy tells him. But he knows. He really does get it. The same way that when we told him that Passover was coming up, and we told him weeks in advance of Passover that we were going to go to this holiday at Nona and Grandpa's house, and there's going to be all these people, and there's going to be all this food, and we read all these Passover books to him, and he, for weeks, was asking, when's the Seder? When is Passover? And we told him it's going to be 2 weeks, then Passover, 1 week, then Passover, and he charted all the way until it was Passover, until the day he woke up and said, it's Passover! And I think it's similar here. I think he really gets that baby girl is going to be coming after the summertime, and he's getting a little sister, and he has all these dolls, his pink dolls that he calls baby. We've now introduced 2 others that are in better condition from his, and he calls those baby's sisters. So I think he gets that people have sisters and that he is going to have one himself. If you're looking for an unforgettable Father's Day gift idea that will feel unique and so special, skip the socks, skip the ties, please skip all the other stuff that people are getting for their dads and their husbands these days, and instead get them an original song from Songfinch. You may have already heard the song that I had written for my twin sister Allie. I shared it on my social media. Basically, when you go to Songfinch's website, you can play little samples of songs from Songfinch singers and songwriters to pick a person that you want for your song. And then you basically go through the easiest process of telling them who the song is for, some personal details about your relationship, and then what you want included in the song. And in just 4 to 7 days, you will have a radio quality song that is 100% unique, and they even give you the option to make it streamable on Spotify. Here's a little clip of the song that was written for my sister.
Wish I could go back to summers and fruit snacks, bunk beds that we had to share our every dream. Wish the sun had never set on playing like we did, laughing when Dad said twins are a blessing.
So whether it's for Father's Day, an upcoming graduation, a wedding gift, whatever the occasion, start your song now to lock in a top Songfinch artist. I highly recommend James Freeborn. He's the one who wrote and sang Allie's song. And for a limited time, Songfinch is letting our listeners upload their songs to Spotify for free, which is normally a $50 charge. So go to songfinch.com/realstuff and start your song. After you purchase, you will see that you can add on Spotify streaming totally for free. Again, my URL is songfinch.com/realstuff. And please do not forget to share your song with me too. songfinch.com/realstuff. Next question is from ExoGabExo. Are you afraid that you won't have enough time with Milo? I'm thinking about a second and can't stop thinking about it. To be totally honest with you, I am not afraid about that. And maybe it's because I have a little boy who is extremely attached to his dad. More so, it seems, than he's attached to me. And I have a theory that that's because Michael is the one who does the morning wake-ups every morning. And since I've been in this pregnancy, Michael has taken over a lot of the nighttime bath stuff and the reading and the putting to bed. I'm usually there, but Michael's like the main player in all of these things right now. And he's very attached to Michael. And especially if this baby comes and I am, recovering postpartum and I'm maybe breastfeeding and whatever's happening and I might need to be with the baby more, I don't think it's going to be as big of a change for Milo as it would be if I was that person for him right now that he was so attached to. I know that attachment fluctuates and he does go through different phases of asking for mommy more or daddy more, but for the most part, he's been pretty consistently, seemingly a little more attached to Michael, more of a daddy's boy. So I personally think adding a baby in is going to be pretty normal in terms of his routine and who's there and who's doing stuff with him. I'm sure that there are going to be moments when I'm going to want to prioritize spending alone time with Milo. And similarly, on the opposite side of that coin, I'm sure Michael is going to want those alone moments with our baby girl. So we are going to have to rejigger things, and I'm sure it's not going to be a perfect transition. But one thing I'm really not afraid of is that I'm not going to have enough time with Milo. Another thing I'm really trying to work on, I've heard a lot of people talk about once they introduce a second, how it becomes this divide and conquer moment where mom's with the baby and dad's with the toddler, and then maybe you switch for an hour here and there to get time with the other, but that it just becomes like you and your partner don't see each other. And I had a friend who told me once that she intentionally combated that by making sure she and her partner were doing things to the best of their abilities together. So if they're giving their toddler the bath and the mom needs to nurse the baby, the mom's nursing the baby in the bathroom. Or if they're doing bedtime and reading to the toddler, they're just sitting there with the baby and they bring the baby along for those things. And of course, there are going to be moments when they need to be in their own rooms or they're napping at different times or whatever. Of course, it's not always going to work out like that, but Michael and I have talked about trying as best as we possible to maintain our unit of 4 instead of branching off into 2 and 2. So I guess that's my answer to not being afraid. Okay. Annie Saurus, 33, asks, are you going to have another baby nurse for the first few weeks like you did with Milo? Yes, we are planning on using the same nurse that we used the first time, who we absolutely love. It was the best money we've ever spent. I know that having a night nurse there is not something that every family wants. It's not something that every person feels comfortable with. Inviting someone into your house like that to look after a newborn in the sleeping hours, but especially because we plan to use the same person, we just feel such a sense of comfort that she can take care of our child, and we have all of our faith and trust in her. And it was actually my followers and my audience that first even told me about a night nurse. It wasn't something my mom did when I was a baby. It wasn't something my mother-in-law did. So thank you to my followers who first told me about this concept. And then I have since heard from so many followers around the world that this is a very normal thing to have around the world, whether it's a nurse coming in from the outside or whether it's a family member that moves in with you and does this with you. But we did feel like it was the best possible use of our money, and we have been saving up again to do the same thing this time. And there's a whole highlight on my Instagram called Q&A and Q&A 2, where it's like postpartum Q&As from the first time around. In one of them, I think it's Q&A 2, I do a whole Q&A with our nurse. So if you're interested in that, you can go listen. Next question is from Just Wonder Foo that says, first time mom here, tips to prep for breastfeeding. Your stash was out of this world. And I just want to follow this up with another breastfeeding question because I'll answer them together. It says, do you plan to breastfeed again? Okay, so this is where I want to get into that plan I was trying to create for this time around, where I was really trying to iron out, am I going to breastfeed? If so, how am I doing it? Is it going to look the same as last time? And as I said, I realized I can't plan for these things. But what I can and will say is that I do not think I want to do it the way that I did it the first time. And what I mean by that is when you say my stash was out of this world, yes. I do not want an out-of-this-world stash this time. The way that I built that stash last time was by way over pumping. My body probably thought I had quadruplets with the amount I was pumping. And I was purely doing that because I thought that was a necessary way to keep things flowing. So just to give you like a couple examples of what I did. Overnight, first and foremost, we had this night nurse who we were paying to watch our baby overnight so that we could sleep. And I myself did not sleep through the night until 7 months postpartum because I was waking up 2 times per night at least to pump my boobs to completion, to empty them out. So I basically was telling my body, which is on a very regimented circadian rhythm when it comes to breast milk, I was telling my body, there's a baby multiple times a night that needs milk. Keep making a lot of milk at this hour of the night. So not only was I pumping and pumping and pumping overnight and storing and stashing bags of milk from each and every night, but after pretty much every feed that Milo did, even if he was done and he got enough milk, I was convinced that my boobs weren't done being emptied. So I would usually put on my pump after every single feed and get a little bit more milk out until they were like fully drained. And at that point, because Milo was always hungry, like always putting his hands in his mouth and giving us hunger cues, I would actually give him the milk that I pulled out, like the extra milk in a bottle after the breastfeeding session, and he would always finish it all. So of course, him finishing it was confirming for me that he needed more than he could possibly suck, and that I needed to put the pump on to just get that power to pull it out and then adequately nourish him. No. I will not be doing that again. If I am breastfeeding this time, like if it works out and if my baby doesn't have a tongue or a lip tie and can nurse, and if it feels good and whatever, and I decide that I want to breastfeed, I think my plan is going to be to do what I want to call breastfeeding light. It's probably not light. It's probably more like breastfeeding normal, but it's just the polar opposite of what I did last time. So first and foremost, I really want to avoid stimulating my boobs overnight. I want to avoid telling my body you need to make milk at night. I have tons of friends who breastfed their babies for months and months and never once woke up overnight. Of course, they would get engorged and they'd have to breastfeed first thing in the morning to empty them out, but they were able to sleep through the night. And that is vital to me, and I really want to try to do that. Secondly, I will not be pumping after a feed. Whatever the baby gets out is how much milk I'm going to assume that baby needs. If they're still showing hunger cues and if it's clear my supply is low, I'm going to supplement with formula instead of pumping myself to death. So those are just a few changes. I mean, I guess those are tips for getting a big stash, is to just majorly overstimulate yourself. I would say if you want a big stash, talk to a lactation consultant. Do not listen to this podcast. But that's my answer to how I had such a crazy oversupply and whether or not I plan to do it again. I'm so out of breath. Pregnancy makes you so out of breath, and sitting in this seat is hurting my back. Chelly Laura said, when did you start feeling this baby's first movements compared to your first? I'm convinced I felt this baby moving at 7 weeks pregnant. And listen, I think scientifically that's impossible. It was probably gas. But the feeling of something just kind of moving inside of me without my control, running through me, felt very reminiscent of baby kicks. And realistically, it was probably closer to 14 or 15 weeks when I was really feeling flutters. But the second time around, you just know what you're looking out for. So it's a lot easier to spot those kicks. And add that on top of the fact that I have a very petite frame to begin with. Just like front to back wise, there's not a lot of room. And then add that onto the fact that my placenta is posterior, so it's in the back, as I was told. Some people who have an anterior placenta, I believe, might feel kicks later because the placenta is like in between the baby and their stomach. Mine is in the back. So they said I maybe would feel kicks earlier, and I absolutely did. And that was definitely a couple weeks earlier than I felt it the first time. Okay. I'm so hot and uncomfortable. Next question. Cyanite says, did you feel more tired this pregnancy compared to the first? Absolutely. I feel way more tired this time. It's probably because I have a toddler this time, which means I can't sleep as late both during the week and on the weekends. I can't just veg and do nothing. We always have very active weekends. I also feel like I'm just a little busier this time around with work stuff. And because I don't live in the city and I have a lot of events in the city, I've been going into the city a decent amount, which is just a lot more work than being in the city and getting to an event downtown. Plus, with the launch of the podcast, I'm busier. I just have like a lot more things happening. So I feel more tired, and I feel I have less time to sleep and recover. Also, I'm working out throughout this pregnancy, which I did not do once during my first pregnancy, like literally not once, maybe a couple of yoga flows. This time I'm doing 2 strength training sessions a week virtually with my trainer from the city, and that definitely causes fatigue as well. I mean, I'm sure it's helping me feel stronger and get stronger overall, but it's making me more tired. The next question is from Karina Klingzel, and it says, how do you feel about the birth? Are you more or less calm compared to the first time? If I'm being honest, surprisingly, you would think that if you've been through this once and it went generally well, that you would have a lower level of anxiety about it this time. But I feel like I'm dreading it a little bit more this time than I was the first time. And it's kind of similar to how like the whole first time, everything just felt novel and exciting, and I was excited for every stage. I remember pulling up to the hospital and just being excited that we were there. This time, it's almost like I know too much. I know a little bit more about what it entails. I know all the stages and steps. It's less of a mystery. So it's just a little bit less exciting and a little bit more like I'm just kind of waiting for it to all hopefully go as planned. Also, having had such a good first example that was set, it's almost like I'm hoping that the second one can be as easy and as good as the first one was, because I know that it could have been way worse the first time. So I don't know, not that I'm actively sitting here stressing about it, but I'm not as excited maybe as I was the first time to be in the hospital. I've been thinking a lot recently about the actual act of getting the baby out, and my memory of the moment where my OB was like stretching me open so that I could push Milo's head out. I'm just remembering that moment and remembering how hard she was pushing. And listen, I wasn't in pain. I had an epidural, but she was putting her whole body into it. She was throwing herself in, stretching me open. And, it took me a really long time physically to recover down there from what was happening. I just even remember in the days following having like some bruising and some general discomfort from all the pressure that was going on during this. And the thought of going through that again, and the thought of basically going back to square one with healing down there, is a little bit more dreaded this time than it was the first time because I just didn't know what was going to happen the first time. Jenny Aarons asked, are you concerned about eating enough protein and low-carb foods for blood sugar? I definitely don't think about my blood sugar levels on a daily basis. If you guys remember, a little while ago, I did that test that came back and told me, I think it was my A1C level was a little bit high and was in the pre-diabetic range. And it basically told me that my fasting blood glucose level was higher than it should have been. And somehow over the past 6 months or so, I recently, like a couple weeks ago, did that test again, and my levels are back to normal. So I'm not in the pre-diabetic range. I didn't really change much about my diet, but I guess, I don't know, ever since we moved to this house, I feel like we've just been doing a lot more cooking, a lot less takeout, and I feel like I have a generally healthy diet. So no, I don't think about my blood sugar on a day-to-day basis. But I would say I just have an overall balanced diet. Mish214 said, are you planning on introducing your son to the new baby once you're home or at the hospital? I guess this is subject to change. Right now, we're planning on doing it at the hospital. My first time in the hospital, we couldn't have any guests because of COVID. We could only have one guest, and that was going to be our doula, who then couldn't make it because I dilated so quickly. So the one guest wound up being my mom. This time, I don't think there are the same COVID restrictions, so I'm personally excited to have our family come to the hospital, like our big family, and come meet the baby in the hospital. And I would assume that one set of Milo's grandparents who will be with him while we are having the baby will come with Milo, and Michael and I will get to introduce him there. JC Spina said, can you share expected expenses that you've encountered with one child being raised in New York City? I'm not going to really dive into like the baby gear that you need because that kind of stuff you really need anywhere. Crib, bouncers, carriers, whatever. But in the city, you probably do need like a big city stroller, which is probably more expensive than a standard small umbrella travel stroller. So the big stroller. And then in terms of the classes that we sent Milo to, which we only sent him to a few things, like a music class and a gym class, I want to say each class with these young kids was like somewhere between $30 and $40 a class. And I usually would buy a package for them so that I wasn't like thinking every week about the cost. But you could probably expect $30 to $40 if you're sending them to a class like that. And then there is the childcare cost if you are planning on having childcare. And my understanding of most nannies in New York City, of course, there are going to be nannies who charge less than this and some that charge more. But at least amongst my friends, the average hourly rate for a nanny in New York City when I was living there was between $25 to $32 an hour. And the cost that you're going to incur is, of course, related to how many hours you use the nanny for, how many days a week. At that point, we had our nanny for 3 days a week for only a portion of the day, and she was charging $31 an hour, so she was on the higher end of that range. So yeah, those are some of the expected expenses, but I can't personally get into the cost of things like the daycares or the schools, which I know can be very expensive if you're doing any private school situation, because I left before Milo was going to any of those. But from my understanding from friends, it could be very expensive and also very competitive. Like a lot of their babies had to send in application videos to get into a daycare or like a preschool. Whereas in the town I live in, I needed to go on a wait list because there were a lot of people, but once we got off the wait list, they didn't ask any questions about whether or not my son was worthy of going to the school. Manda Ray asks thoughts about age gap. So Milo and his little sister will be about 3 years apart, just shy of 3 years. I personally love this age gap. This is the exact age gap pretty much that Michael and his sister are. And they basically overlapped for 1 year in high school. So it was like freshman, senior relationship. And they today are very close and have always been very close. Personally, I didn't necessarily plan for a specific age gap. My age gap to my brother, me and my sister being twins, our age gap to our older brother was 2 grades. We were actually closer to 3 years apart, but he was held back a grade because he was a December birthday. So we were 2 grades apart. So we had a little bit more time together we had a year together in middle school, and then we had 2 years together in high school. And I loved that. I feel like we were also very close as siblings. If I had to choose just the age gap based on that, I probably would have chosen what I had, which was 2 grades apart, which would have meant having a second baby sooner. But that said, I did not plan this pregnancy or anything around a desired age gap between the kids. I was planning it purely based on my readiness to have another baby. And so I was not ready a moment sooner than I tried, personally. I think there are a lot of perks of having 2 very quickly when people have 2 under 2, or I know someone that had 2 under 1. There are some perks. Obviously, there are some things that are hard about it, but then as they grow, they're just so close in age and it gets easier with them together. That's my only thought about age gap. I truthfully was not plotting out a specific age gap. If I had not been ready to have another baby and to go through another pregnancy for 3 more years, I would have been happy with these kids having a 6-7 year age gap. Truthfully, I don't think age gap is a major thought in my mind. I actually think that bigger age gaps are kind of nice for the parents. It's kind of nice to like get to go back to that baby phase once you've really cleansed your spirit from it, and you get to go back to something that's exciting instead of putting yourself back in a position that you are not prepared for. And I also think it's kind of nice for an older kid to get a younger baby sibling. Like, I personally always wanted a baby sibling. And if I had gotten one when I was 7 or 8 or 10, I would have been so excited. So there's pros and cons of each, but can't say we planned anything with a specific age gap in mind. Amy Lavi said, did this pregnancy affect how many children you want? I think Michael and I were always between the 2 or the 3 kids. We definitely didn't want to have just one, and we didn't want to have more than 3. We always said, we'll decide. And I personally think I always thought maybe I would have 3 because I'm one of 3. And if you liked the situation you grew up in, you maybe want to replicate it. So before this second pregnancy, it was just a little unclear to me how many we were going to have or how many I really wanted. And I have to say that being in the first trimester of this second pregnancy and going through what I went through with the nausea and the throwing up and the fatigue and the exhaustion, I turned to Michael very early in this pregnancy and said to him, this is it for me. We are done after 2. I am not doing this for a 3rd time. And listen, I really, really wanted in my life to have a daughter. And I said this to Michael before I knew the sex. So if we had gotten pregnant with another boy, I would have been donezo as well. And I would have given up my dream of maybe having a daughter one day because I did not want to do this a 3rd time. So absolutely, this pregnancy affected how many children I wanted. It made it clear to me that I only want to go through this twice and I only want to have 2 kids. G Truck said, have you ever experienced sciatica pain? First pregnancy here and first trimester had it super strong. I was definitely feeling that sciatic pain, which is like that nerve pain that goes down your legs, towards the end mostly of my first pregnancy. And this time around, I'm definitely feeling that pain. I would call it less sciatic pain, like it's not shooting down my legs, but it's more like my hip and butt region, specifically at night, like the end of the day, feels so sore and tired. It's almost like I've walked to my limit, like I've taken as many steps as my body can tolerate, and my body knows it's nighttime and knows I need to recline and rest. And so usually like we'll be watching a show in bed, and if I get up around 10 to go pee one more time before bed, that last walk to and from the bathroom is the most painful walk of the whole day, because my body is just like, lie down, goddammit, you have done enough. And it's my lower hips. There's just a lot of pressure in that area, and by the time I actually get in bed, I'm just so ready to be horizontal. Han MC asked me, how far along were you when you announced publicly? Was it earlier, later, or the same for the first pregnancy? I do think it was about the same. It might have been 1 week earlier this time. I remember my first time I announced at maybe 15 weeks when I was just in the start of my second trimester. This time I may have been closer to the end of the first trimester, but I felt like I was still waiting for the same point, until you're basically in your second trimester. One thing that was different was not announcing publicly like on Instagram, but just announcing to the people in my life and the people I know in real life. The first time around, I really waited to tell a lot of my friends and coworkers and just people that were not my immediate family until I was closer to that second trimester. And this time it was like I found out I was pregnant, and the same day or like 2 days later, everyone in my real life knew. I just felt way less of a desire to hold the secret in this time. I felt like it wasn't as big of a deal to announce to people that I was pregnant because I had already done it once. So I just feel like I told everyone. I felt like everyone I worked with on my podcast team and on my content team needed to know because I knew it was going to affect me for a few months in a very drastic way, and I didn't want to just be vague with them. Okay, last question here, also from Han MC. What scares you the most about going from 1 to 2? I'm currently pregnant with the second myself. I think what I'm the most confused about and just a little alarmed about is figuring out how I am going to possibly be able to get back to work in the way that I think I want to get back to it while managing the schedules of 2, specifically a toddler and a newborn. You know, with Milo, when I wanted to get back to work, we hired a nanny, and a nanny's very capable of building their whole day and schedule around one child. It's just a little more unclear to me when we have our nanny and we have childcare, how is this nanny going to manage a newborn with Milo? Because he's going to be going into a 3s program at school. He's going to have activities and play dates. And, you know, people talk about that second baby just going along for the ride to the play dates and to the soccer class and just being there alongside the older sibling. But I've shared here, you know, we have very rigorous views about scheduling in the day, and specifically when it comes to collecting a child's nighttime sleep and helping them sleep better at night. A big part of that is having a regimented daytime schedule in terms of feeds and naps and getting them used to the environment of their nursery and the crib and the dark. And I don't necessarily think I want my second child to just be going on the fly. I know she's going to have to flex more than Milo did. I know that, and I'm not saying that she won't do it at all. But if I can help it, she will still be on a regimented daytime feed and nap schedule, which is going to be really hard to implement while Milo is going about his day. So that's one thing I'm just a little stressed about. I'm sure we'll figure it out. And honestly, as I said to Michael, I kind of just feel like as the mom, and this is where like dynamics of partner dynamics comes in, and maybe it's mom to dad dynamics, maybe it's working for myself versus a company dynamic, I don't know. But I said to Michael, I kind of feel like for the whole first year, maybe 2 years of this baby's life, this new baby's life, I'm just going to have to maybe be a little bit less plugged in at work in order to make this work. If I want her to be napping in the crib and our nanny's taking Milo out to an activity, then someone's got to be watching the monitor. We are not having 2 nannies, one to watch the baby and one to watch Milo. So someone's got to be watching the monitor while she takes her crib nap. And anyone with kids knows sometimes those crib naps go awry and the baby doesn't nap, and then whatever you were planning on doing during that time off is just totally screwed. So I think I need to be prepared to not be fully plugged back in at work, at least right away, if I have these expectations. So that's kind of what scares me the most about 1 to 2. And I guess the second thing is just right now with Milo and having 1, it's of course a lot more work than it was to have 0, but it is very manageable in terms of Michael and I each kind of splitting who's getting some time off. If one of us needs time off, whether he wants to go play golf, I want to go get a manicure, I want to see a friend, he wants to see a friend, whatever, the other one can easily take care of Milo by themselves. And I know taking care of 2 by yourself, at least in those early days, you got to work up to it. Like a lot of people get extreme anxiety about having to manage 2 at once, especially when you have like a newborn and a toddler. So I do feel like those early days are going to be a lot about us like switching off. You know, one of us is with the toddler doing something while the other is with the baby, and then switching, which kind of goes against what I said above about trying to be a pod of 4, but who knows? I don't have the answers. I'm just saying that I do fear a little bit that we will each have a lot less, quote, time off a lot less time to just do things for ourselves and to know that the other is covered and that the other is capable of managing. So thank you so much for listening to this Q&A. I'm officially overheated, out of breath. This is such a pregnancy Q&A. I feel like I'm sitting here with extreme back pain and exhaustion, and the lights are killing me. So I'm going to stop with this recording now, but thank you so much for listening. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to drop them underneath the YouTube version or to comment them on Instagram on any post. And thank you, as always, for tuning back in and for being listeners here. We'll see you next time on The Real Stuff. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Real Stuff. I'm Lucie Fink. Don't forget to follow the show on social media at The Real Stuff Pod. And if you're liking these episodes, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a written review. It helps the show so much. And if you're feeling called to come on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. We'll see you next week for another intimate conversation on The Real Stuff.